Pure Class Education Podcast brought to you by Twinkl. Where Herky smiles, stories and chats that are made worthwhile. So if your teacher's needing a wee boost, Pure Class is the podcast you'll choose.
Welcome to Pure Class, the podcast where Northern Irish teachers can find a bit of everything. I'm Sarah, your host, and this podcast is brought to you by Twinkl Resources. Whether you're winding down on the drive home, catching up at your desk, or enjoying a cuppa on the sofa, join us for teaching tips, inspiring stories, and a good dose of crack. Welcome to episode 1 of Pure Class. I'm Sarah, your host, and I've been teaching for over 13 years, from mainstream classrooms to private schools and autism unit, and I've even been involved in educational leadership. I feel like I've seen it all. But these days, I'm loving my role at Twinkl, where I get to focus on supporting all of you amazing Northern Irish teachers with top-notch resources for your key Stage 3 classes. So now it looks like I'm taking on a new adventure, podcasting. It struck me we don't really have a dedicated podcast for Northern Irish teachers, and I thought, well, why not give it a go? In the midst of all the hustle and bustle of teaching, I hope this podcast can be your radio staff room, a place to chat about all things education, share a few laughs, and maybe even pick up some new ideas. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Declan McLaughlin from Queen's University, Belfast. Declan's a senior lecturer. He's here in a professional capacity, but truth be told, we go way back, all the way back to our uni days. So hopefully this chat will give you a chance to get to know me a bit better as we reminisce about our experiences as educators and have a bit of crack along the way. So you're very welcome, Declan.
Hello, Sarah. Thanks for having me along today, and hello to all the listeners out there. My name is Declan McLaughlin. I'm a senior lecturer education in Queen's University, Belfast. I'm a physiologist by training, but I primarily teach anatomy, physiology and biomedical sciences in the School of Medicine, Dentistry and Biomedical Sciences. So I'm a big science nerd, as Sarah would probably know me. We come from two different academic pathways, shall we say it like that. I know that you're a bit more arts and humanities, where I'm the big science nerd.
Yeah.
But one of the other roles that I have at university is as an advisor of studies. And this term advisor of studies is kind of like a personal tutor. It's primarily a pastoral role. And that's one of the big avenues that I'm focusing on in terms of my academic work. My research is really about advisees, the role of student advisors and the importance that plays in the student experience. And most recently, like yourself, Sarah, I have dipped my toe in the world of podcasting. So it's great to be here on your first episode, and long may it continue.
You're going to keep me right with the podcasting world as well.
I will do my best.
So yeah, you touched on there your specialities, and you've quite a lot of them there, and you're a big science nerd, as you put it, not me. So yeah, I'm the other end of the spectrum, where I a qualified English teacher, and I would have taught things like English literature, learning for life and work, all those kind of humanities. I've also worked in every type of school in Northern Ireland. I've worked in an autism unit, I've worked in a private school, I've been a head of department. I just feel like I've tried a lot of things out. And I'm hoping that I can bring all that expertise to the podcast. But again, it's great to have someone like yourself on, because you are the opposite in lots of ways, because it's more the sciences that you're into, and it's obviously third level education that you practice in. But I think what we're going to get out of today is we're going to see that we actually have so many similarities, and
Absolutely.
I find that whenever we start having a chat, we really learn a lot from each other. So hopefully our listeners do as well. But we're not all about work all the time, and hopefully this won't be a dry podcast. So yeah, I know Declan from university. We had nights out together. We have a very similar music taste. We enjoy a good pun, a good sense of humour.
It'll be a challenge to see how many we can sneak in through the course of this episode, and see if your listeners pick up on it as well.
Oh, the pressure's on now. Well, I'll start with Pure Class. I was quite proud of that title. Declan was also our wedding photographer. We got married in Rome, and I just threw him a camera and said, "You're good with techie stuff. Will you be our photographer?" And he actually agreed. Looking back now, he was mad to agree, but
well, I should
times.
point out that I am in no way qualified to be a photographer, nor a wedding photographer at that. It was very much as you described, Sarah. It was, here, Declan, will you be our photographer? Here's a camera. And I think it worked out okay. We got
I
a
think it
few nice
worked out.
shots.
We did. So that can tell our listeners about the trust I have in you, in yourself.
Much.
Yeah. Let's get started with our segment I'm hoping to run on our podcast just to get to know my guests. So what I've done is I've asked AI to help me with this. So we're going to have a Northern Irish footy question round with our guests, because I know
Excellent.
that we're talking specifically to our teachers in Northern Ireland, and we do things a bit differently here from our counterparts in other countries, and we have our own culture, would we say. I was asking AI, what do you understand about Northern Ireland? What kind of questions would you give me for a Northern Irish footy round on a podcast? So half the laugh is that they're AI generated. So I've shared them with you there, Declan. Do you want to ask me?
Sarah, would you rather have a slice of potato bread with a fried egg and a
Uh,
sausage, it's quite big, or a scone with cream and jam from Aunt Sandra's tea room?
I immediately want the sweet thing, the scone with cream and jam from Aunt Sandra's. However, I should go for the potato bread and the fried egg. I would have more protein. But if it was up to me, if it was a wee treat, definitely the scone with cream and
Scone.
jam sounds good. It's a Northern Irish thing, but I suppose it's quite English
Well,
and Irish too, isn't it?
yeah.
The potato bread is the very Northern Irish bit there, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay, I'm ready. Hit me. You ask me.
Would you rather have 15's tray bake from your granny's oven or a Vita malt loaf from the shop?
I would, without a doubt, say a 15. To be honest,
But
I'm not a lover of Vita, but I will point out that the beauty of 15s, Sarah, is that you don't need to put them in the oven. They are a no bake tray bake. So I think that's maybe where AI's tried to overcomplicate things.
they
But
definitely
15
have.
any day of the week, they are a staple. You can make them as small as big, although if you want to make them small, you're obviously going to eat at least three of them. So I like them. I like them in a big slab.
That sounds good. I would be partial to a 15 now. Um, my brother doesn't really like sweets, but he will take a 15 if you make it without the coconut,
Oh,
which is sort of sacrilege,
it
but
is. What a strange character he.
he'd be raging now. I'd give him a shout out. So yeah, we don't put the 15 in the oven. Maybe we should go and work for this was Gemini, Google, other AI providers are available. Maybe we should let them know that we don't put 15s in the oven. Interestingly, before we move on from this, Twinkl have a new mascot, Twinkl Northern Ireland, and it's a 15.
Oh,
And probably around the time this podcast is coming out, there's going to be a competition online, Name the 15. So this is my shout out to the secondary school teachers to say that's a competition aimed at you as well. I think you can win a bakery good giveaway, some goodies. So have a
oh,
look for
excellent.
that on the socials. You'll be entering that, Declan, to get some 15s.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Well, I hope there's a 15 in it at least.
not baked in the oven.
Not baked in an oven.
That could be an interesting science experiment. All right. Well, now that we're full on 15s and had our coffee break, let's get down to talking about teaching. So probably our listeners have recognised, if you've got a good ear for these things, Declan and I have a very different accent, and he'd mentioned that he's based in Belfast. Fair to say you're Belfast born and bred, Declan?
Born, bred, and buttered is how I would describe myself. Yeah.
Very much a city boy, as I would say, and I am from Kilrea, which is in County Derry, Londonderry, however you like to say it. As Declan would say, I think I described myself as a bit of a culture recently.
Mm.
What was your retort?
I mean, absolutely. My
Not a bit.
my view, I am absolutely a proud city boy. I love Belfast. I love the city that I was born in, the city that I live in. I love the country too, but I am a city boy. My wife would tell my view, my definition of anyone who's not from the city is if you have to get a blue bus to go to where you live, then you are, with the nicest intent in the world, you are a culture. So basically, if you have to get on a blue TransLink bus or a train and you live outside of the city limits, you are absolutely a culture in
As
my book.
as opposed to the pink buses.
I suppose the
The
pink buses,
the
yes.
pink buses keep you
Anywhere,
in
anywhere
Belfast.
worth going to is municipal within the city.
All we knew growing up was the blue Ulster buses.
Mhm.
So yeah, why I bring this up is because I think whenever we first met at university and I was training to be a teacher, it was really helpful for me to have friends who were from the city to talk about the differences in education. I had done a lot of my training in the countryside. When I did my PGC, I went home and lived with my parents, and it was a very different experience. And then I don't think I was prepared for the difference in city education and country education. And now we're talking about, I'm going to show my age here, we're talking about 2013, 2014 sort of era. And I found it quite different. Would you agree, Declan, that it's in the context of education, it's different in
Yeah,
the
I
different
mean,
contexts of city and country?
I would definitely say that how city kids, let's just say for what it is, act and behave, not necessarily how they're taught, but
Yeah.
definitely the environment that you grow up in kind of influences, I guess, people's approaches to education.
Hmm.
So the beauty of teaching in a university is that you're like a microcosm of society, is that you have
Yes.
all of the city slickers coming and joining, and then you have all the country bumpkins coming and joining, and then you have the beautiful international kind of influence that comes in with all our international students, and equally from students from the Republic, from GB as well. So it's a big mixing pot
Mhm.
when you get to university. The beauty of it is that you all just get chucked in one big room and you got to get on with it.
As a student at university, you spend so long steeped in different cultures and, trying to grow as a person with your tolerance and your understanding of different cultures. And then when you train as a teacher and then you go out into a school, it's back to that homogenous setting almost.
Mhm.
And that has its own challenges. I would say one of the big things I found different about teaching in Belfast as an English teacher, it's quite funny. Whenever you would mark essays and students were saying we went on our school trip. We would spell that OUR, but they would write ARE, our school trip.
Yeah,
So I became very familiar with the Belfast accent, and I just thought that was fascinating that, even the academic challenges were different based
yeah.
on accent, things like that. Just going back to what you said about, people from the outskirts being culties and everything. It's so interesting that that's something that we discuss and we cling to almost. I don't know if it's like that in other cultures, the difference between people in the city and people from the country. That's the real divide in Northern Ireland I'm seeing. So there was one time where I had left the room and another teacher was with the students, and I was quite new in the school in Belfast, and one of the students said to the teacher, is she from the country? She sounds really country. Is she from Glengormley? And I just thought this was hilarious because to me, Glengormley is Belfast, and it just emphasized to me how insular and localized everything was. So that was a particular challenge, I suppose.
Yeah. And being
Um,
insular and localized, I would say, is not necessarily a bad thing.
no,
It means that the students in your classroom have a lot of similarities, a lot of commonality. They have a lot of things that they can, they're maybe part of the same football team or a local
sure.
club, or they go to the same youth center, or there's things that give them a little sense of community, of
They
course.
said to me, Miss, are you going home to Scotland for your Easter holidays? And I was like, why would I go to Scotland? What home? What are you talking about? And they were like, are you not from Scotland? And they maybe they hadn't heard my accent before. And I suppose it does sound similar to Scottish if you haven't heard it before. But it just their eyes when I told them, no, I'm from up the road. But yeah, so the context we teach in informs things a lot. And I suppose as an educator, there's only so much I can share without naming people and places and so on.
Yeah. It's a
But
fine line to walk.
it is, but needless to say, it helps you grow as a person and understand more people. The next thing I was going to talk about within the context of teaching, Declan, was lockdown. When I haven't seen someone in a while, I'm always like, how was lockdown for you? It's very
Mm.
illuminating, I think. All the highs and the lows, but I think what lockdown did was it kind of forced us to take our education in a different path and to deliver as an educator online. I was in a position where I was teaching in an online school and we had already kind of established a structure for this, but it was a whole new thing having to teach from your house. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that at third level. How did you find that? What were the pros and cons? Did you take anything away from it? I think it's something that all educators have an opinion on nowadays because we've been through a big seismic shift. How did that work out for yourself?
Well, my lockdown was a struggle. Thanks for asking. I think, like a
Yeah.
lot of people, if we're being honest about it, it's not something that I think anyone thought we would ever see on our lifetime, although the scientists and the statisticians would tell us otherwise. We were due a big
Yeah.
pandemic.
Hmm.
But what I think lockdown really showed was educators across all primary, secondary, and tertiary level. It really showed how quickly and adaptable that teachers and educators can be when they have to be.
Absolutely.
And yes, okay, maybe initially there was a bit of a fear there, but we've come out the other end, thankfully, and I'd say we're probably better for it, maybe a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
threadbare, and took a bit of a hammering while we got there. But the best things are. And what I think lockdown did was it accelerated what was coming, the
Mm-hmm.
push towards not necessarily fully remote or fully online education. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I would hate to see the day where primary ones or primary school kids were sitting down to
Mm-hmm.
do their entire educational life through a screen. I certainly think there will be elements of that that will come in,
Mm-hmm.
but to do an entirely digital, online, remote, isolated education system, I would hate to see that day. But what the lockdown did was it accelerated the need for staff to upskill, for schools, for universities, for businesses, corporations, offices to train and get access to video recording software, webcams. I mean, I'm sitting here talking to you, and in my office, I've got three screens on my computer in front of me. I would never 5 years ago thought that I had any need for more than one screen.
I bet
And
you
now
couldn't do without them now.
and now I could absolutely, I couldn't
Yeah.
do without it because I can have my emails on one computer, I can have a document I'm working on, and my Teams or my Zoom or whatever on a third computer, and it's all within. I feel like I'm multitasking, like I should be in one of those science fiction movies,
I had the three screens and I'm the same as yourself. Like I'm using two here, but I really miss my third screen. And if you'd have said to me a while ago, I would have thought that looks like a lot. But I was sitting with the three screens and this colleague came up to me and she was like, when's the plane landing? Because it looks like you're in,
air traffic control.
air traffic control. But yeah, that kind of forced our hand, didn't it? And it made us see possibilities that we maybe didn't know before. I was recently helping a friend with a study doing a PhD in online education, and they shared with me that what they're finding when they talk to educators and students is they feel that lockdown has really put people off online education. And it is the future and it is coming, lots of elements of it, but people had a lot of bad experiences just because we weren't equipped and we had to upskill so quickly that it was almost, dare I say it, traumatic. And it was a massive mental load for teachers. Um, but maybe phased in properly, that could work. I do some tutoring in my spare time and I was tutoring a student yesterday, and his mum was saying to me, the online option wouldn't work for us because they're so young, and there's lots of debates out there about that. But I think ultimately, when you're little, you need that social interaction, don't you?
Absolutely.
And
And
would
I
you
would
say that's
say
important at third level?
absolutely, without a doubt.
Yeah.
That's coming out of lockdown and COVID on the far side of it now. We're still seeing kind of repercussions of that. Um,
Yeah.
not necessarily all bad outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it good in terms of that upskilling and the use of electronic and digital resources has continued.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're hearing back from our students and what we as staff are seeing, and again, this is not exclusively a third level issue. This is
Mm-hmm.
from speaking to other friends who are teachers in secondary and primary, is that it's the social aspects of education and teaching and being human beings and the social creatures that we are,
Mm-hmm.
that need for companionship, of friendship, of sitting beside your buddy in the lecture theatre going, I haven't done the questions, all those emotions that you get from
Yeah.
physically being in a place with your backside on a seat behind a desk with a laptop or pen and paper, whatever, in front of you. It's those things that had been missing, which
Or when you feel
should
like a team, like if you were doing group work, I've seen it where, you set a group work online with younger kids. There's a lot of heavy monitoring required to make sure is everyone pulling their weight here.
Mhm.
Whereas in a social situation, you can't hide anywhere.
No, it's hard to do when
It's
you're in the room with your teacher or lecturer or whatever it happens to be.
this is it. And Yeah, I would say that it did help me in a lot of ways to upskill myself in that kind of online provision. And like I say, I do offer tuition to some students, and most of my tuition now is online. And because it's older students and they want to be there and everything, it works really well for me,
I think
but
the
it doesn't
online
work for
thing
everyone.
brings that flexibility. The fact that you can do it remotely now means that it's accessible to more people. That if you've got, secondary level students who
Hmm.
maybe have a free hour in the evenings, the fact that you can do it from your own kitchen table, from your bedroom, from your study, and I guess from third level for more mature learners, for adult learners, for people who have kids, who have caring responsibilities,
Hmm.
have part-time
Hmm.
jobs, the fact that when we have maybe some lectures that are streamed live or we have some pre-recorded, they can fit that around their own timetable. So if they
Hmm.
are up at 11 o'clock at night feeding the baby and the baby goes to sleep in their arms, they can still maybe listen in and get 20 minutes of a lecture rather than
Hmm.
having to, juggle this, that, and the other to make sure that they're out the door with a bum on a seat at 9 o'clock. Now, there is
That's it.
still value for
Hmm.
in-person lectures and having an in-person campus, and
Hmm.
maybe argues for the same at a schooling level, either primary or secondary. But knowing that there is flexibility there for particular students and that it's not going to be one size fits all. It won't work for all of the
Exactly.
people all of the
Hmm.
time. The
Hmm.
fact that we know that we can do it, and
Yes.
particularly if you're doing tutoring or
Hmm.
running evening classes or something like that, it's a huge valuable resource that we now have.
Absolutely. And then if I think about the struggles that face teachers, our mainstream teachers nowadays, because I know some of them, maybe those who are listening, tutor as a second income, to begin to travel somewhere and pay for the diesel costs, or,
Hmm.
to set up your home for tutoring, those things, you incur a cost. We're going through a cost of living crisis. Maybe you have kids at home and you can't leave the house. Whereas with online, you have that option. And I just think it's incredible over the years how we've grown. Like in the last couple of months, I was teaching a young girl from Belfast, helping her with her A level, and I couldn't have done that before. Your parents will post on social media, in there's two groups, I think, Northern Irish tutor groups, and they'll ask, does anyone know a tutor who can do this module or this, that, or the other? Whereas before, I might have looked at someone in Belfast and thought that's too far. I was
Hmm.
like, sure, give me a shout. So it's incredible. And then also I tutor a young girl in England. Even that's possible now as well. I do have to change my accent a little bit, Declan, when I'm speaking to her, bless
Tone
her.
it down a bit, get your RP out, go back to your English lit days.
Get your RP out. Yeah, yeah, you definitely. I just have to change it a little bit, so that they understand me. It's the same with Belfast as well. I need to slow down sometimes as well. Um, but I know the main thing when we're talking to mainstream teachers here, the day to day in the classroom, like the banter's not the same online. I know that someone might say something cheeky, and it's not cheeky to be bad behavior or it needs reported, but it's kind of what makes your day whenever the kids are having the crack with you a little bit.
Yeah.
And I know from the online provision, they're not going to unmute if they're going to say something. Do you know what I mean? It sort of takes away that filter, and everyone can be themselves a little bit more.
Yeah.
And then I suppose what the benefit of the online lesson is, if I was doing a revision lesson with more than one student, then you're very much like, everything we say here has to be on the topic, and it keeps everyone on message and on topic. So that's the
Yeah.
benefit. So yeah, pros and cons, as you say. I've definitely learned a lot from it, and I've learned what you can actually achieve in an hour. So the next thing I wanted to chat to you about, Declan, was what are the key issues affecting students and therefore educators. So we talked a little bit about the online provision and how people have a lot going on in their lives. And I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about your role, which I think is really interesting, because obviously I've trained as a teacher, and part of our training is to understand that we're working with minors, and that there's so much going on in their lives just as part of growing up. I would not want to go back to being a teenager if you paid me. But there's a lot going on with them, and we need to understand their issues. And growing up in today's world is so different to say like the era when we were at school. And as educators, we really need to understand that. Do you feel that that's still the case at third level. Sometimes I would have found myself in work feeling frustrated that I was trying to sort out a lot of pastoral problems, and really, if parents were helping, if the government gave us more money, there's so many pain points and complaints you can make. But ultimately, from talking to yourself, it's made me realize, pastoral issues don't really go away. And some pastoral issues can still be present no matter how much support is given by parents, government, healthcare, etc. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about how that affects your role in third level, and any lessons we can learn from that as secondary teachers. I can have a think about those as well.
Sure. So what I would say is I'm kind of in a strange position where I absolutely class myself as an educator, as a lecturer, and I guess ultimately as a teacher, but I'm not a trained teacher like yourself or many of your listeners out there. I didn't do a teaching qualification. I didn't study primary school education, secondary school education. I am a subject expert who, not to blow my own trumpet, but has a flair or has a passion or a drive to impart that knowledge onto other people. And if that's what a definition of a teacher is, well then yes. But my job is not as a teacher. I am a scientist who is good at communicating science to other people. So what I'm trying to say is that I've had no formal training on how to do this. Now, I've done a few postgrad things about, I have got a teaching qualification in higher education training, but that is not what my initial degree pathway, it's not what my undergraduate pathway is in. So I'm in this position where I am working with people who are choosing to come to university, whether because they think that's the next thing that they should do because all their buddies are going to university, or if it's because they have a genuine interest in a subject, or if it's because life got in the way and they didn't or couldn't do it when they wanted to, and they've come back more as a mature student, maybe 10, 15 years, if not sometimes longer down the line, and have experienced the university of life and are now coming back to do what they love. When you have people coming to university at third level, they still bring all of the things with them that a secondary school student will have. So, we've got people who are coming and will go through university with not a bother, and they'll come out with their 2-1, with their first, whatever it is they happen to come with, and you'll very rarely see them. And then we have students that have come carrying responsibilities, or they have a diagnosis of a learning disability that they've just recently got, or they had in school, and now suddenly they're an adult. For the vast majority of my teaching, I'm working with adults. So we don't have that immediate pastoral legal responsibility that primary and secondary tend to have. I'm working with adults. If they don't turn up, they don't come to class, I'm not really going to chase them. It's their choice. Now,
whereas if someone doesn't show up for our class, it's like hit the panic button.
Well, that's it. And there is an element of that with me. So one of the other roles that I have in university, apart from being a teacher, a lecturer, is this position called advisor of studies. It's an academic advising role, and really an advisor of studies is there to guide students through the rules and regulations, to make sure that you get them from when they get their foot in the door on their first day of university, to making sure they walk across the Whitla Hall at the end of their 3, 4, 5, however many years they're with us, with their fancy piece of paper and a nice frock on them. Okay, so it's my job.
But I need to interject there. They don't get the nice furry hood that the humanities get.
They don't, not scientists, no.
No, so we might not have the science smarts, but we get the furry hoods.
You get a furry collar.
Shout out to that, yeah.
Shout out the arts and humanities.
What you're saying, Declan, is you want to make sure that the students are able to access the education that you're providing, even though they've signed up to it, and even though they've passed the entrance requirements. You're trying to guide them to the finish line. I would say that sounds very similar to secondary school. It would probably apply best to the likes of grammar schools that still have entrance exams, where that someone's passed the entrance exam, so you immediately know they're capable of doing what I'm asking them to do for the most part, and I'm there to help them through the challenges to get to the finish line. And then I know for people listening who maybe are in non-selective schools, the context is quite different. You're seeing what are the strengths of this student and what can they achieve. What can I do to help this learner leave with as many qualifications as possible? And obviously that's across different disciplines, but yours is more distilled into one. You used the phrase when we were chatting about making the door wider for your students, and I know that's something that the Education Authority here in Northern Ireland are looking at the minute. Now that we live in a more enlightened society, we're discovering more diagnoses, we're discovering a whole world of neurodiversity, and we're discovering that we need to cater to students in different ways. And as educators, we're trying to do that with a few limitations that perhaps are in our way. How would you say your role, how do you make that door wider for your students?
Yeah, I mean that analogy is a really wonderful one, particularly in education, because it says to students, if you can't fit through the door, you can't get to university. It's about the university saying, well, how wide do we need to make this door to make sure that you can come and participate, achieve what you want to achieve, get your degree, develop your education further. So if you are a parent, if you have dependents, if you're a carer, if you have a disability, if you're neurodivergent, if you have dyslexia, if you just need a little bit of extra time, if you have whatever it happens to be, is that we can make that door wide enough that you can come in. And then once you're here, what can we do to knock down any hurdles or barriers? It's all about this social justice. It's, I'm sure your listeners and yourself have seen that image of, the three fellas trying to see a football match and they stand on crates to make things
yes,
equal. But ultimately what you want to do is you want to remove the fence. You want to take the fence away so that no matter where you're standing, that you remove the barriers that allow them to see the football match. You remove the barriers that allow them to access that education. And that's partly what my role of an advisor of studies is. It's to make sure that we can get them through there with our personal tutoring system. We point them in the direction of disability services, the well-being, the mental health team, the learning development service to help them with their studies. Because these issues, they don't leave them at the door when they come to university. They bring them with them from primary school, from secondary school. It will follow them through the rest of their adult life. And even when they graduate from the university, they don't leave it at the door.
There are students who feel like, that they have a lot going on. Maybe it's something pastoral, maybe it is a disability, and they're like, this is an issue, this is a challenge. They don't leave it is right. And it's the same for us as secondary educators. When a child comes to school, they bring their whole self to school. They don't leave their autism at home.
Nor would you want them to, because then
exactly.
that's not, you're not getting the full student there. You're not getting the true person. And
Absolutely.
That's what I love about university, is that it's meant to be one of these last remaining places where you've got kind of free thought and, within reason.
That's a podcast in itself.
Again, where you have, this ability to explore, to be individualistic, to challenge yourself, to challenge others. And that's a really nice environment to be working in and promoting. So, when we have a student that has gone to primary school in an all-boys school, has gone to secondary school or a grammar school in an all-boys school, and is suddenly in a room that is full of people, not just from Belfast, the city that they grew in, but from Kilray and Dungannon. And God forbid there are females in the class, and God forbid that there would be people from different countries. And you just have to say, this is what the world's like, folks. You got to get on with it. People are different. We come in all shapes, sizes, sorts, odds and ends. And you just have to be a good egg and get on with it. And any challenges that come your way, then come to me and we'll work through them.
You got me thinking there about, you were talking about students joining you and finally seeing how diverse the world is, perhaps if they've come from a particular context. And I think that's something that is in my mind, particularly if I'm thinking about our listeners and someone who's a form tutor, for example, and you have a mix of students in your class and you want them to understand diversity and you want them to grow in that understanding. Some of it is on them, but a lot of it is on you to create that environment. And sometimes we have to have uncomfortable discussions if needs be, maybe more so in secondary school than in university. But I know making the door wider within a secondary school context, I know that for me, that's a whole podcast in itself, indeed.
That's, as an advisor of studies, you are ultimately, if you boil it down to that, you are a signpost. You're there to point students in the direction, unless you, of course, can help them immediately when they're in the office with you. But I'm not a counsellor. I'm not trained in mental health and well-being. I am not trained in learning development. But there are colleagues in the university who are paid, whose job it is to literally do those things. So I'm like a great big signpost. If the student comes to me and says, look, Declan, I'm struggling with reading here. The words are all jumbled. When I was going through secondary school, I kind of thought I maybe had dyslexia or something like that. And now nothing was ever done about it. You're not by yourself here. The university
Yeah.
still has a duty of care to you
Hmm.
to, like I said, widen the door to make sure and remove the hurdles. Kind of thinking, knowing that there was something up with that's a learning need that they have that was
Yeah.
undiagnosed. Or now that they're an adult, they can take a little bit more ownership of it. And we do get those really headstrong, independent students that
Mm.
didn't want anyone to do anything for them
Mm.
in secondary education, but they want to do it themselves. And there's that, empowerment that they now have, which we absolutely support and would
Yeah.
encourage. And one of the things one of my good colleagues says is that there are an awful lot of students who will declare a disability, and there
Hmm.
are probably twice as many students that won't declare a disability. And it's not our role to
Hmm.
seek them out. Our role is to be there as the signpost if and
Hmm.
when they decide to come to us and ask and look for help. We can't impose any of this on them. The vast majority, they are adult learners, and legally, in the eyes of the law, they have their own agency. They can
Yeah.
decide what they want to do. We are
That's
merely
so
there to point
interesting.
them in the right
Yeah.
direction.
But yeah, you have to appreciate their own agency. But I think to make that door wider, to use that phrase, if we had more access to counselling for young people, there's only so much we can do as teachers, and even if we're trained in it, it's not always within our professional role to
No,
act as a
absolutely.
mental health professional. And that again is another fine line. And a lot of training that we've received in secondary schools recently has been about behaviour, and we're being told students can't learn until their basic needs are met, and that includes their emotional needs.
Mhm.
And a lot of what we need to do is address those emotional needs. But when I say we, I mean society. So I would love to hear thoughts on that from educators who are listening. I did go to see a school recently with my son where they do invest heavily in counsellors and have on-site counsellors and specific counselling rooms. And I just thought, that pastoral provision was amazing, but then whenever you pay for that, something else in the school has to give. Yeah, maybe anyone who's listening who's interested in that area, any counsellors, any school educators or school counsellors, let me know, because we could definitely sort the world out on an episode, I think. The next thing I wanted to chat to you about, Declan, was resources. So I know that in your role as a lecturer, you make your own resources, is that right?
Do
And I wanted you to tell me a little bit about how you make your resources, when do you make them, what kind of time do you get, how do you think that's different to our role in secondary school? And I'll just talk a little bit about how I've found some tips and tricks for speeding us up with resources over the years. So yeah, when do you find the time, Declan, to make your resources?
time is that's the eternal question, really. I think for any type of educator, no matter what level you're teaching at, the beauty of teaching in third level is that and being an academic is that you have academic freedom. So you're not necessarily bound as rigorously as I would imagine primary and secondary school teachers would be. Now, that's not exclusively true. There are still standards that we need to meet, that we're kind of governed a little bit, if that's the right term to use, by the QAA, the Quality Assurance Agency. So they, for example, one of the subjects I teach, biomedical science, they set subject benchmarks. So
Mm-hmm.
they should know certain specific areas, or at least reasonably be expected to know. So we have a list of those, and we need to make sure whatever we're teaching is meeting those standards and those benchmarks. But in terms of how you do it and what specific textbook you use and what specific method you use, that's where the academic freedom comes into. So I
Mm-hmm.
could do an entire lecture on one specific protein if I wanted to, if there was a reason
Mm-hmm.
for doing it. So certainly over the summer period, this is where I have my bugbears with people who say, "Oh, you're a teacher; it must be quiet over the summer whenever the
Mm-hmm.
students aren't about." And I'm like, we're not the same as primary and secondary teachers.
Yeah.
We still have students. We have postgraduate master students here over the summer. I still go to work. I'm not away from the campus. Yes, there's a little bit more flexibility, and it's really the time when I take our annual leave, but I'm still teaching, I'm still working, I'm still
Going
lecturing.
to interject there for our listeners because they're all going to be screaming at the speakers now.
Have I
Um,
just started
we,
World War III, have I?
yeah, okay, it's fair. We do get summer off, but I know from my own experience and talking to teachers that you're you spend a lot of time constantly thinking, did I tidy up my room okay?
Yeah.
Have I left everything sitting okay? Are those things photocopied for next year? And then you have a little while in the middle where you take your holidays, but I think a lot of people talk about getting the August fear of going back, and then
The
you
August
go.
fear is real here as
It's
well.
very real. And then you go into shops that have back to school banners and they all look very cheery and everything for a parent. But as a teacher, when you see them, you get the fear and you go, up, it's coming, it's looming. We do get the holidays off, that is fair. But there's a lot of prep in the evenings and so on. And
So
I'm just sticking up for my secondary crew. We deserve it.
what I was going to say here, Sarah, was that where I think we differ from primary and secondary colleagues is that we have that summer where we constantly work. So
Right.
our prep, so I have new lectures that I need to develop, so I can spread that out over the
Yeah.
summer months. Whereas I
Uh-huh.
know that my colleagues in primary and secondary, although yes, you have the summer off, but you're teaching, let's arbitrarily say 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
But then I also know that your prep for the next day or the next week or whatever takes place then in the evenings. Maybe people
Yeah.
stay in school to 5 o'clock to tidy up the room, get stuff photocopied for
Sure.
next day's lessons. But also then, what are you doing for next week? So I know that a lot of my relatives and friends who are teachers and who have been teachers take that work home with them. So they work in the
Yeah.
evenings as well. So it's this issue of time. It's where your time is spread. For me, it's long and thin over the whole calendar year or through an academic calendar year.
Yeah.
But maybe for primary and secondary colleagues, it's short and fat. What I would also say is my teaching day is probably different from how your teaching day would have looked as a teacher. You're
Yeah.
back to back.
And yeah, you do have your free periods that you're allowed, but as our listeners will attest to as well,
That
you
free period's never free in the way
yeah,
that
by the
most people
time
would
you
assume it is.
yeah, by the time you tidy up, like if a class leaves, I just think back to like a large class of first years. They're only kids, but they're getting used to tidying up after themselves. You're picking up gum off the floor, then you have to wash your hands, then you're like, you're maybe having to spray something if they've just come from PE. You're
Yeah,
going to have to pick up the bits of paper from the floor. You're going to have to take their worksheets and put them in the right folder. And then if an incident's happened, you're having to write up the
right,
incident,
that poured it.
phone
Yeah.
the parents, talk to head of year, whoever, depending on the scale of the incident. And by the time you do that, you need to take a breath and you're really maybe not in the frame of mind to create a resource for tomorrow.
No.
And I suppose that's where I want to talk about Twinkl. Obviously, this is a Twinkl sponsored podcast. And something that I think is really cool about Twinkl, so for those of you that are new to it, is our CEO, the owner of Twinkl, John Seaton, he was actually a solicitor by trade and his wife was a primary school teacher. I just learned this recently when I started working for them. So in the evenings, he would notice that his wife was working a lot. And whenever he probed into this and asked her, like, why are you still working? It's John and Susie, by the way, so said to him, well, I have to make resources and prep for tomorrow. And he had this great idea. I wish I had it. I'd be doing well. He had this idea. What if we make a teacher resource site and then it means that you can do all those on the ground things, but your lesson is ready for tomorrow. The resources are ready to go. All you need to do is pick them and print them, and teacher has made it and it's good to go.
Yeah.
This has been commonplace in primary school education, I'd say, maybe 10 years or so. My kids come home from school and their school bag is full of Twinkl sheets, and anyone I chat to that has anything to do with primary schools or has kids at primary school, they all know Twinkl. I do find secondary school teachers are like, oh, is that primary thing? And what we're trying to do now in Northern Ireland is we're trying to set up a key stage 3 area for secondary school and hopefully grow that. We'll have GCSE, who knows, we'll have A level down the line, where we have the lessons ready made and we can provide those for our customers. And it's really important to Twinkl that it's made by teachers so that you know that it's legit, and it's made by local teachers so you know that it can help with ETI inspections, that it's on the right lines. So yeah, that's my shout out to Twinkl. I started to use Twinkl when I was teaching in a school that had some younger classes, and someone gave me a Twinkl login to try it out and I thought, this is fantastic. Everything is sitting here.
Particularly if you have had that busy day where you haven't had the opportunity, just even that there was something there that, your day's caught up with you, you haven't had time to prep, that there is a resource there that still allows you to deliver really good quality assured,
Yeah,
verified, checked, legitimate
yeah,
lesson to your students the next day.
I don't think we've any plans to broach third level education, but if we did,
But if
would
it
that be
did,
helpful?
it's I think about, if I'm given a new topic, how do I go about it? We kind of have to be careful because we have this academic integrity. We have to make sure that we're not seen to be plagiarizing. We can't tell
Yeah,
students
sure,
that you can't be doing this, and then we effectively take somebody else's lecture that
sure.
they did 3 or 4 years ago and we just hash it out as our own.
Yeah,
That's not what it is. But even using something as a starting point, and I don't know whether, your resources in Twinkl can be used in that way, that, here's a lesson plan on a
absolutely.
particular
Yeah.
subject. It might get the ball rolling or get, the students thinking about something, and then still give you the freedom, or the students the freedom and the creativity to explore that a little bit more. So even as a first step on the ladder
Mm-hmm.
for a lesson plan, I imagine it could be used in that context as well.
The resources are at hand and they're laid out in such a way that we have a team of illustrators who do an awesome job. Shout out to the Twinkl illustrators. And they're able to depict like local settings and so on, and they're able to create age appropriate illustrations. We have
Yeah.
different illustrations for different age groups, and to some people it just sounds like, oh, there's a nice picture, but really when we're talking about learners with different needs, we have a lot of visual learners. I find most learners I've encountered have been visual learners, and just having a picture there to stimulate their thought process, say it was a group activity, that really helps. And like I was teaching a student how to do point, evidence, explain, and there was this resource that it just put all of the sentence starters in one place. It was so organized and it's one page, it's ready made, it's print friendly, and just made my life so much easier. Really what I'm trying to do at the minute is I'm trying to chat to all you lovely folk and get everyone chatting about education, because there's a lot of expertise within Northern Ireland to share, but I want to let you know about this sort of gem that everyone's not aware of in the secondary sphere, where we've got resources to make your job easier, because we know that it's hard. We know that we're not entirely out of the woods yet. I think we're still action short of strike in a lot of schools, and we have to be very careful what we do with our time. These ready-made resources are invaluable, I would say, and I've definitely got a lot out of my Twinkl subscription through the years. It's just knowing where to look and knowing where to find the secondary stuff. And shout out to my social pages. We do share stuff every day. We share a resource every day. I only really share things that complement the Northern Irish curriculum as well. We're coming to the end of our episode, Declan. Have really enjoyed chatting with yourself about all things education, and there's actually so many similarities, even though we do have quite different professions. Something that I want to do with my podcast is, if we end on a high note or a funny note, where we just talk about your favorite school memory. I have to give one each time I do a podcast, so I'll share a few today, and then maybe it'll take a different tone in the next episode, who knows. So my parents bumped into someone in a restaurant, and it was my primary 3 teacher, and I quite like this memory that she had of me, but it's also a bit cringy and you're 100% allowed to laugh. So she said, I remember your Sarah in primary 3, and she said, I was wheeling out the big TV. Do you remember the TV on wheels? You had
The
those in
TV.
City
Yeah.
too.
Must have been the end of the year, was it?
Perhaps it was. We had been reading Charlie and the Chocolate Factory as a class novel. I had finished it, being the bookworm that I was and all the rest of it. And I hadn't seen the movie yet, and my parents were going to watch it with me. But I wasn't too fussed. And then she says, I remember your Sarah shouting, no, no, you'll ruin all the pictures in my head. I was not the popular child that day. So I'm laughing at it now, knowing what school dynamics are like, and how there must have been lots of 7-year-old eye rolling when I said that. I thought that was funny that was her lasting memory of me. Generally still prefer the books to the movies. I think I was wise for my young years, Declan, perhaps.
Yeah, wise beyond your years. Yeah.
Because this is a Key Stage 3 focused podcast in a lot of ways. I was thinking, what are my favourite memories from being that age? A lot of it is cringe, because you're figuring out who you are and so on. Something that came to mind was, me and my friend used to love going to the canteen and getting cookies, and they had these really nice cookies at our school. A friend whose mum actually worked in the school, whenever Jamie Oliver ruined it for us, we used to have these lovely cookies, and whenever he brought in his healthy eating program, they were banned, but they had this massive overstock in the freezer of cookies. And she invited us to her house one time, and the selling point of the party was my mum's got the leftover cookies from the canteen, and it was like, oh, we're going to go get the
Contraband,
fancy cookies.
they got more rare the more that were consumed.
I think cookie contraband. But yeah, they did. We had a really good canteen pre Jamie Oliver. I'm not dissing the healthy lifestyle. I need to get on that and get healthier and everything. But there's a lot to be said for good old Loretto School canteen cookie. Shout out to the convent cookies. So yeah, those are just a few tidbits from my memories. I'm sure I'll have more profound memories and memories of teachers and good lessons in future episodes. What about yourself, Declan? Anything from you?
You've kind of put me on the spot, but one lasting memory that I have was also when I was in primary three. My primary three teacher, Mrs. Quigley, who sadly passed away not that long ago,
Oh,
was beautiful, caring human being. Properly, just a lovely lady. And
that's
what
awesome.
she on more than one line, which maybe sounds a bit silly, but up until then, I hadn't done an awful lot of comprehension and writing and
Yeah.
literacy. All of my sentences were rather short. Suddenly, when I was in P3 and I could write slightly longer sentences, I was trying to cram it all in on the one space. I can tell you the seat that I was in. If you brought me back to the classroom, who was sitting beside me, where I was in the room at the time, and she came in over my shoulder and just whispered in my right ear and said, "You know, you can use another line." And it sounds really stupid, but it was in my head. And the beauty of this story is that I actually had the honor of being best man at one of my good long friends' wedding at Donal. And Donal's mum was Mrs. Quigley, who was my P3 teacher. So I was able to tell her this
No
story in my
way.
best man speech. So everything that I've done in education, every new line that I take was thanks to Mary Quigley. Just an absolutely wonderful, wonderful person who I dearly miss.
That's an awesome story.
Yeah.
Shout
So
out
it's
to
it's
Donal
all it's
and his
all
mum.
down to her.
Awesome. That's
Um,
amazing.
it,
That's really making a difference. I think people say it sounds really trite, and it's when you hear stories like that on the ground where we're from, you realize that actually how much your job matters.
Yeah,
Like,
it does,
that's amazing.
and you should never underestimate how much of a difference, however insignificant you might think it
Yeah.
is, that it does make to people. It really does. And I guess from a secondary level, one of the memories that I have, and it's maybe what's pushed me into the role that I'm in now. It was always that encouragement that we had from my teachers. It was like this, the way I call it is like a pastoral push on the back. It was just that quiet support. I had good time at school. I have very fond memories of school,
Hmm.
but I definitely wouldn't have had it as easy if it were not for the support that I have with the teachers that kind of pushing me in the back, pushing me towards opportunities that were presented, and a little nudge saying, "Go for that. You're more than capable."
Yeah.
So I think with Mrs. Quigley and my teachers in secondary education as well, it was that gentle push on the back, that kind of pastoral push that's maybe
Hmm.
got me to where I am now. Perhaps that's why I'm an advisor of studies. Perhaps that's why I love this pastoral
Hmm.
role that I do so much. So never underestimate the importance that teachers, whatever flavor of teacher you are, can play on shaping a student.
That's a good sort of pep talk for our listeners. One that I have, I always thought was really funny. I was doing my primary school placement. So when you do a secondary school placement, I don't know if it's still the same in Northern Ireland, for your PGCE, whenever you're a secondary teacher, you have to do 2 weeks in a primary school. So I did mine in a local primary school and got on really well with the student, and they did really well and seemed to engage with my lessons. And they wrote me the most beautiful card when I was leaving. And I knew that spelling wasn't always their forte,
Yep.
but they're very intelligent, that young lady, and in lots of ways. And the card said, "Sorry, you have to live." And I think just I was such a newbie. Like, it was literally my first 2 weeks of teaching ever. And I was like, "What do you mean by this?" Didn't really keep my cool. I was like, what on earth?" Until she said, she was like, "It was sorry you have to leave." And and I
Two
just always
very
thought
different meanings.
two very different sentiments. And I think just, when they were that age, it was like primary six, and they were playful, and I nearly wouldn't have put it past them to write something silly. She genuinely went, "I'm sorry, you have to leave." And then, fun addition to that, that individual is now a teacher themselves. I saw them recently and reminded them of this. I had a good
Excellent.
laugh about it. So it all comes full circle in the end, I tell you. Declan, we've really seen that there's so many similarities between secondary education and third level education, and we're facing a lot of the same issues. And I think my big takeaway from chatting to you both today and in our previous conversations is that at the heart of education, you're working with people. People have complex lives, and their issues don't go away just when they become an adult or they go
No,
to
absolutely
further
not.
education. It goes back to all that training that we're having in school. At the minute, I know the Education Authority delivers a lot of training on like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where we talk about can't get to the learning part of the person until we've addressed their basic needs. And it follows that basic needs of a primary school student are going to be always very present, but actually secondary school and third level, that we still sometimes have to nudge them towards help and support. Even though it's
Absolutely.
not always easy, it's worth it in the end, would you say?
I would say absolutely.
Yeah.
You got to make sure that you're working with a well-rounded person and then take them from that baseline and build on it. So you got to work with good solid foundations first.
That's it, exactly. So hopefully myself and my colleagues who are listening, we will do our bit for that, and then we'll maybe send some students on their merry way to study the sciences, etc.
We
with
will
yourself, and you'll
greatly
help.
receive them on the far end.
Pleasure chatting with you, Declan,
Thanks
and
for having us, Sarah.
all the best.
Cheers.
Thanks for joining us, listeners. If you enjoyed the chat, why not follow us on our social pages to keep up to date? We have a fantastic Facebook group dedicated to Twinkl NI Key Stage 3 support, where I post my top resources for the week and I try to go across all of the subjects. You'll also find us on Instagram, and please don't forget to sign up for free for our weekly newsletter packed with resources and ideas to make your teaching week go smoothly. If you had a good time with this podcast, hit that subscribe button, keep an eye out for episode 2, and spread the word to your fellow teachers. Till next time, keep her lit.